Public interest stage is fairly self-evident again, really. It's about, is it in the public interest to move forward with the prosecution? And public interest includes things like, for example, is it the kind of serious offence where, although it might have been a long time ago, the criminality is so bad that it would entail, a substantial jail term. So this kind of area comes into some of the long-standing sexual abuse cases, where somebody says, well, how can it be reliable evidence? How can you charge somebody on the basis of something that happened 30 years ago? Well, the answer is, if it's met the evidential stage, it comes into this area, that it's actually that serious that it has to go to charge and it has to be seen by CPS, and if needs be, go to court. Okay. So, getting back to Victoria Haigh, this is she. This was back a few years when she had to run off to Ireland with her new baby to avoid that being taken into care. She's since come back since, and of course social services have got no problem with the way she treats her new child, who's now 2 years old. Anyway, back to having got Victoria Haigh released after 3 weeks. In the interim, I did some investigative work and interviewed the landlady of the pub, who said that, oh, this individual barmaid doesn't actually work here, she was just helping out, so we've got no records. I then checked the address of this individual, and a name popped up which seemed to be familiar, and when we checked through it, it turned out that the barmaid was the daughter of the alleged paedophile's next-door neighbour. I've mentioned to you that 2 Nottinghamshire detectives went sifting through Nottinghamshire Probation Trust's records trying to pin something else on her. What I didn't mention to you is something really quite so phenomenally stupid you have to almost smile. They arrested Victoria Haigh again on the basis of new information they claimed to have found in the Probation Trust's record, which actually turned out to be old cases which had been dismissed more than a year ago. They threw her into a police station cell for 3 hours and then interviewed her for another 3 hours, during which time, in front of Victoria's solicitor, the lead detective said, well, I've discussed the discrepancy in the barmaid's statement with the alleged paedophile. Well, guess what? I mean, this was in front of her solicitor. The alleged paedophile had a word with his next-door neighbour, who then had a word with the barmaid, who then changed her statement to try and make it look as though she hadn't perjured herself. We're at court in October with this one, so watch this space. I have to say, we're working with, obviously, the agencies or the voluntary sector that are involved and the charities that are involved in this area, but we've also had a huge amount of support from Christopher Booker of The Telegraph, Sue Reid of The Mail, and Carol Jamie of The Guardian, all who have been just fantastic. I mean, there's only, bear in mind, everybody thinks that these journalists working in this environment can get every story out. They can't. They have to be almost more ruthless in selecting the stories than I am, because what they've got is a mainstream audience, and this is, whether you like it or not, this is a really, really difficult story to tell in a way that the public can grasp. And I know we're getting there, but I'm just trying to set your expectation level for the journalists. They can't cover every story, however worthy they are. So we are in a situation where we pretty much documented Victoria's case. We now have a situation where we have evidenced the criminal collusion of 5 public sector agencies, including the police. We are at a point where we have already logged criminal complaints. On one instance where they've failed to investigate, we've logged a complaint to the IPCC, and we are making complete pests of themselves. I have to say that I'm doing all of this from the perspective of understanding that sooner or later they are going to come at me. So if you see my name in the headlines, please do take it with a pinch of salt. I'm expecting, actually at 4:30 this morning, I was writing a press release in preparation for a story that I expect the Mirror to run against me, simply because I fingered one of their reporters as being complicit in publishing false information. Carl, I'll take 2 more questions.
Yeah, you mentioned that 5 different sets of public officials are implicated now and are going to be investigated. Did one of those include the head teacher of the child's school? Because this is another whole raft of, possible wrongdoing.
A very valuable question. We became aware that there was some missing evidence in the Children's Services bundle, and one of the pieces of missing evidence was the school log, because we were aware that the child had made persistent complaints of sexual abuse to school staff, and that we thought they must have been recorded, mustn't they? We thought that the school we know legally has an obligation to report them to Children's Services, and yet somehow that log wasn't in the bundle. We had to fight very hard to get a copy of that log, which we've now got. And I have to say, in fairness, the school had at the time a very good head teacher who was quite fastidious of making sure the logs were properly kept, and did inform Children's Services, who rebuffed her, who said, we don't want that, we don't want that information, it's not relevant to the case. I have to say that when we pursued that issue, with what we expected to be a compliant head teacher, the head teacher was moved.
Because I heard earlier on that the infant school teacher in whose class the child was sacked when she reported to the head teacher that she was worried about the little girl.
We have a whole a number of instances where people have been moved very conveniently. Let me tell you very quickly that Victoria's Child started making allegations in 2006 at the age of, I believe, 3, thank you. And when it got to 2009, after a number of allegations had been made to various independent parties, the police conducted 2 video interviews with specialist teams. Immediately following, they were 4 months apart, by the way, and absolutely consistent. Immediately after the last police videoed interview, Social Services also conducted an interview, and at that point it was concluded that the child was at risk from its father. The case went to court. The judge agreed, suspended the contact order, and set a date for a finding of fact hearing. In the 3 months between the 2 hearings, the social worker was taken off the case, the CAFCAS officer was changed, and the judge was changed. And guess what? By the time it came back to court 3 months later, all of a sudden the tables had been turned, and Victoria Haigh found herself being accused of emotional abuse, allegedly having coached the child, despite every single expert and specialist having agreed 3 months previously that the child was genuine and at risk. What we found, in addition, during my investigation, is that the brother of the alleged paedophile, who is the Youth Development Officer for Humberside Constabulary, had interjected into the South Yorkshire Police investigation and actually had been formally reprimanded for so doing. We also have a statement from a social worker that says that he was intimidating, turned up at a meeting, a social workers meeting, and introduced himself as the police. He was completely out of area, nothing to do with him, but informed them that these allegations were against his brother were completely spurious. So, yes, I mean, there are a whole bunch of convenient happenings between a situation where it was quite clear to professionals what was going on, and a very convenient 180-degree U-turn. Now, I have to say, not in this case. In other cases I'm working on, I have found huge involvement with closed societies, including Freemasonry. And I'm working on one. In fact, I've got an interview tomorrow with Debbie Platt, the Detective Chief Superintendent from Derbyshire Constabulary, because I've exposed a potential paedophile who is amongst the great and the good of Derbyshire. He's a senior Mason, and we know that senior Masons have already colluded to try and conceal his paedophile activities. I have to say, prior to that, and this is not on my watch, one of his fellow great and the good of the establishment has just been jailed for 12 years. So,
One down, many to go.
So it's 1:05. I'll take two more questions because I'm conscious I'm eating into your lunch break now. Sabine? The lady on your left.
Sorry for harsh question. Have you ever been intimidated, blackmailed for what are you doing? I hope you got me. Because you are going against a whole system.
I'm in a situation where I have worked on so many cases of what I call public interest, campaigns of public interest. I was involved in the 90s in an investigation of NHS land sales that we eventually turned over to the fraud squad because we found large-scale fraud going on the back of sales of NHS land as they closed down mental health facilities. I've got an instance in my local city where I've exposed £25 million worth of lost savings and £10 million worth of fraudulent double spend on contracts. If you were to ask me what was the root cause of the bombardment that I'm currently receiving in every aspect of my personal and business life, I'd struggle to define it, to be honest, because these people have a long reach and they're very well networked. And if you want to look at the easiest identifiable network for paedophiles, I'm afraid to say it's Freemasonry. You know, there are too many cases now. There are too many cases now where victims are saying him, and gosh, look, they're all Masons. You know, it's gone beyond coincidence now. And whilst I accept the Freemasons do some very good charitable works, and whilst I accept there are some very good and genuine people who are members for all the right reasons, the fact of the matter is that there is a cancer running through them, and the cancer is called paedophilia.
One more, please.
Sorry, very quickly.
I'm just wondering if there is any statistic about the social services of so-called guardians and their associates that been injured or killed by the parents or the snatched children.
I will be straightforwardly honest with you, I have no idea. There will be some statistics on assaults on social workers. The one statistic that I'm really keen to nail is to get a really accurate figure on forced adoptions, which seems to wobble about depending on who you talk to. What I want to do is pair that up with those stats as we speak. The gentleman over here has been waiting ages.
I was elaborating on what she was saying before. Do you find you're being tapped? People following you? Because I've had that in crew from social workers. You know, they sit there in cars thinking that you don't see them they're watching you or tapping your phone. I've heard the noises and sounds on my phone where you can actually hear people in the background, and we get that as part of the RIPA legislation which the local authorities use on wheelie bins, school catchments, so it's not beyond the realms of possibility to believe that they're using it against us.
I'm not aware of me being tapped, and I'm not aware of me having been followed. However, I come from a background of having been the author of something called TADAG, which is a security software mechanism that's on about 1 billion PCs worldwide. And if any of them were stupid enough to try anything in terms of my IT or telephone line, I think they're likely to find themselves slapped with a court order fairly quickly.
Well, you see, the principle, because you're high profile, they back up. The rest of us, they don't think the same.
Can you not teach us that?
Given a lifetime, maybe.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just conscious of the time. It's now 1:10. We're currently in a situation with a number of the cases where we have already put together the detailed chronologies and document indexes I talked about, or we're about to do that. Some are in process as we speak. This web address currently takes you to our Facebook campaign page. Please, when you get there, please click the like button for the page, not for the comment. I know it's difficult to find. It's just on the right-hand side under the banner. If I got a copy of it here, I'd show you. Please feel free to contribute to that. I have a number of researchers who work with me. Karen Elizabeth's in the room, I believe, and that's hands up. And these people contribute with stories and give me a network so that we get really early visibility of charges and convictions that are being made so that we can expose these people. On top of that, within the campaign page, I'm also drawing attention to any new developments inside government that I think might be useful. The long term is that the Facebook page will eventually just be a campaign page that will be linked to a full website. The idea with a full website is that we will publish our case studies. Now, I know how to anonymise these case studies so we don't fall foul of contempt laws, but publish them we will. So that's a long-term intent, a long-term aspiration. I just ask that you know, I do this in my spare time, and it's difficult, heavy-going work, and it does take time. So please, you know, if you don't see the website in the next 3 months, don't panic. We will get there, but it just does take us a little bit of time. I'm told that lunch is now ready. So for those of you who are Hank Marvin, I'm going to shut up now. I thank you very, very much for your attention and for your super questions. And if anybody wants to talk in the lunch hour, please feel free.